Welcome to California Traditions at San Juan Bautista, and welcome to the Crane House at San Juan Bautista. And, you don't mess with my violin, Anastasio. So we're here kind of doing our Dia de los Muertos, the Halloween thing, and here at the Crane House we have our ghost, Maria Encarnacion, and she died in this house in about 1890, and it's kind of been haunting it ever since, I guess. But this house was built by her first husband, her first of 5 husbands, because she had a very tragic life, and mostly because her husbands kept dying on her. But anyway, its first husband was Jose Maria Sanchez, and so he contracted with an American guy to build this structure as a tavern and a trading post in about 1834, 35, sometime around there. And Jose Maria was a pretty astute businessman, and he was able to take advantage of all activity that was going on with the gold rush and accumulate quite a bit of wealth and property. And so he owned 3 ranchos and built this tavern and involved in various other business ventures and cattle, mainly taking them up to the gold fields and selling them at a very, very good price. But in 1852, he was on his way to San Juan Bautista here, and their adobe was on the other side of the Pajaro River, and so he had to cross the Pajaro River to get here, and it was flooded and water was high, and he didn't make it. He ended up drowning in the Pajaro River, and so that left his wife Maria Encarnacion and with a couple of little kids, and she was illiterate, and she felt that she needed someone to function as a manager for all of her property that was suddenly dumped on her from the death of her husband. And so she hired an American guy in Monterey to manage her estates, and her husband and her had been keeping their gold and their adobe and apparently piled in barrels and stuff stacked over the barrels and hid the best way they could, and so her manager found out about that and told her that she shouldn't be doing that. That's not safe. But then he also told her that she couldn't trust banks either, and so what she needed to do was hand it all over to him, and so as you can imagine, trouble would be forthcoming, and that was the beginning of one of the more notorious episodes of California history, the story of the Sanchez treasure. And so anyway, she married fairly soon, and so husband number 2 was on a steamboat in San Francisco Bay, and the boiler of the steamboat exploded and scalded him, and then a few days later he succumbed to his burns, and so then she married her 3rd husband, who was a local doctor here at San Juan, and so at that point they figured that her husband and her could take care of their affairs, and so they tried to dismiss her manager, and he failed to turn over all the gold that he was keeping for her, and so they threw him in jail in Stockton for embezzlement, and while he was in jail, he got word out to one of his friends to go bury the gold, and so supposedly his friend did that, but then Maria Encarnacion's husband and the guy that buried the gold got into a gunfight, and they both killed each other in the gunfight. And so then the manager said he didn't know where the gold was because he was in jail, and the guy that buried it is dead, so who knows where the gold is. So that set off a whole chain of events, and then feuding went on, and some bandits got involved, and we figure somewhere between 12 and 20 people ended up losing their lives over the whole thing, including the sheriff of Monterey, and because a bandit wanted to try and find this money, and he saw a guy with a pack mule and going up into the mountains, and so he assumed that he was running off with the gold, and so he killed the guy, but there was no gold. He was just on a hunting trip, and so anyway, that got the Monterey sheriff after him, and so a posse went chasing him, and he holed up in a cabin, and then he shot through the door and killed the sheriff, but anyway, things went on for quite a while, and then she married her fourth husband, is George Crane, and so he was known as George the Fourth since he was husband number 4, and so that's where the name of the Crane House comes from. Although George Crane never lived here, because he died in the smallpox epidemic of 1868. But at least she did get 14 years of marriage out of him, so she got a fair amount of time with him, but anyway, he was gone in 1868, and so she decided that she would come and live here in about 1870, and then she had a couple of daughters living with her at the time, and then she was very devoted to the mission and to the church, and it's right next door, and then the Catholic mission school was right across the street, and so she could send her daughters from the porch of this house here to go to school across the street. And so she came here to live as Mrs. Crane, and so that's how the house gets its name of Crane, and so she was here until she died in about 1890, and then she died in this house, and nobody seems to know where she's buried, and so that seems to be kind of a mystery. And we know where George Crane's buried, because he's buried up at the San Juan Bautista cemetery, and she had a really nice monument built to him, and so you can still go up there and find him up there in the cemetery, but nobody seems to know where she is. And so I don't know, as far as I know, she's in some lonely unmarked grave somewhere, so maybe that's why she spends her time here in the house here, because maybe she doesn't like her gravesite very well, because it's an unknown, lonely place. And but she doesn't bother us too much here. She kind of the main thing that she does is get into the refrigerator, and she seemed to have a fascination with the refrigerator. I guess if you're a lady, a 19th century lady, a refrigerator would be a pretty interesting thing. And so she comes and she opens the door and closes the door and opens the door and closes the door, but she doesn't eat anything. And so anyway, we managed to coexist and with no other problems other than that, and that's not really too much of a problem. But historically, this house was supposed to have been the first frame house built in California, and it was built by an American guy who was a ship's carpenter, and apparently he got sick on the ship, and so he got kicked off the ship, and then the Californians took him in, and his name was Thomas Doak, and then he helped out with the altar in the mission, the Laredos in the mission, and then he built this house for Jose Maria Sanchez, and so it was actually a California Hispanic house, but since Thomas Doak built it the way he's familiar with building, and since he's from New England, and it's built kind of in the style of a colonial New England house, and all built out of redwood and split redwood, and so it's survived for quite a few years and several earthquakes, and still here. So we're anticipating it'll be here long after I'm gone. So Maria Encarnacion married one more time when she was here at the Crane House, and so she married Atanasio Alviso, and he was one of her vaqueros, and so he was husband number 5, but he only lasted for about a year, and then he died in a hunting accident, and she never married after that. So apparently she finally gave up on husbands. So anyway, we have Atanasio here, or at least our representation of him, and so I guess he's been at his wake a little bit too long, but well, to be continued.